Well, turning now to Facebook, which actually you have a really great talk about this on your podcast. Last week, we covered the in-depth Wall Street Journal investigation, which found that the social media giant is aware of the toxic effect Instagram has on teenage girls. After reviewing Facebook's internal documents, the journal writes, in 5 presentations over 18 months to this spring, the researchers conducted what they called a teen mental health deep dive and follow-up studies. They came to the conclusion that some of the problems were specific to Instagram and not social media more broadly. In focus groups, Instagram employees heard directly from teens who were struggling. I felt like I had to fight to be considered pretty or even visible, one teen said of her experience on Instagram. After looking through photos on Instagram, another teen told Facebook researchers, it makes me feel insecure about my body, even though I know I'm skinny. In public, Facebook has consistently played down the app's negative effects on teens and hasn't made its research public or available to academics or lawmakers who have asked for it. Instead of referencing their own data showing the negative effects of Instagram, Facebook executives in public have often pointed to studies from the Oxford Internet Institute that have shown little correlation between social media use and depression. Wow. So they just cherry-picked research outside of their own research to cover up the obvious.
Yeah.
Our next guest has gone in depth to break down the effects of social media on young people. Joining us now, Director of Polling at the Institute of Politics at Harvard University, John Della Volpe. He's the author of the upcoming book, Fight: How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America.
John, thank you so much for being here today. We have all heard too much, too many times from middle school teachers, from high school teachers, from student deans in colleges, that anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, suicide are on the rise. And so many of these teachers and instructors and principals and deans that we talk to point back to Instagram. What have you found?
Yes, Joe, thanks for having me. And I think, this was one of the first platforms we discussed the challenges of young people in mental health more than a few years ago. I've been talking to groups of young people for 2 decades now, always asking the same question. Before I start any group, I ask, tell me about what it's like to be a teenager in America. How do you feel, and how do you feel about the country? The words I hear today, regardless of where I am, in the city or in a rural outpost, I hear words like, we're in a downward spiral. It's terrifying. We're broken. It's fake. Folks are closed-minded, divided. It's off the rails. And when we dig in from a qualitative to a quantitative, like we have in several of the last Harvard IOP youth surveys, and by the way, we're doing this because the Harvard students are interested in understanding this mental health epidemic that we're having, we find that young people, specifically young women, who spend time on Instagram, and by the way, not only Instagram, but a lot of other social media, are much more likely to have serious concerns about, as we're seeing here in the data, self-image, personal social relationships, feeling down or depressed. 61% of 18 to 24-year-old young women who are on Instagram feel depressed, anxious, and hopeless. And more than a third in the 2 weeks prior to taking the survey, more than a few times had thoughts about suicide, self-harm, and other ways of harming yourself. So there's no question that there's a correlation between time spent on social media platforms like Instagram and those feelings of depression. And Joe, it's not just statistics. What it means is that 7,000 American families every single year lose a child under the age of 25. Not only because of Instagram, but that's the size of this pandemic, this epidemic that we're dealing with, Mika.
So, just to add to this, again, our own personal experiences with this, with our kids, has been bad. I remember bringing someone into my household to help us get a hold, Joe, of the social media that, my kids were on. And you know what? It's not like you can take the phone away if you have the phone for security reasons or whatever. Or they find a place and they find an account and they'll have one. I mean, the pressure is out there and it's part of their world. And if it's not on their phones, it's on their computers where they're doing their work all night. So there's this argument, Joe, that it's the parents' fault, that you just don't let your kids be on Instagram. Don't let them have a Facebook account if you don't like it. But I believe that the way kids' lives are set up right now, with the way their schools are connected to their computers and their phones are connected to their entire lives, parents are left completely helpless. I'm
a big believer in telling your kids what to do and expecting them to do it. This is one area, though, where even when you do that, there are so many workarounds, and it seems that even the best kids find those workarounds.
It's such a draw for them.
Because it's like TV was back in the 70s and 80s when we were growing up, John. This has just become a part of their world. And you look at what Facebook is doing, instead of addressing this head on, they're now talking about creating an app, an Instagram app for even younger girls. What impact will that have?
Well, we know what impact it has because we can see the impact it's currently having now, which is more than a half of 18 to 24-year-olds, by the way, are depressed. The adolescent mind isn't mature until the age of 25, Joe. So the younger that folks have tools like this, that corporations are designing to keep them on it by showing them things that they think they want to see, but they probably don't, is going to have a more, potentially more tragic result and consequences. I think you were spot on when you made the comparison, frankly, to big tobacco. This is a corporation that has data that knows it's harming its most vulnerable customers. But on the other hand, they're making boatloads of money. And at the end of the day, they're willing to cash those checks and ignore the mental health, the suicide, and the death that's occurring. It's hard enough to be a teenager today. It's hard enough to be, it's always been hard to be a teenager, but when you add in social media, not just in terms of the fear of missing out, by the way, right, in the social and personal relationships, we didn't talk about the damage it's doing to our democracy. Right? And the disarray that young people are seeing, also driven by this. So it's not just the personal issues, it's the other issues as well. And we've collected a lot of data from Facebook over the years. They are the least transparent organization that I'm familiar with. We used to have much more access as researchers to Facebook data, where we can see what gender, what age, what location folks were sharing information. That was not identified, but it was anonymized. But most of that data, as far as I know, has been cut out from folks like us. So they have the answers to fix this, but clearly they have chosen not to.
Who will hold them accountable? Director of Polling at the Institute of Politics at Harvard University, John Del Volpe. Thank you so much.
Hey, now it's time for the mix. There are all sorts of cleanses, right? Juice cleanses, sugar detox. What about a selfie social media detox?
Why?
It's what one model in Australia, an 18-year-old gal, you see her right there, she took these photos and she decided to edit the captions. Beautiful model, and she edited them to really reflect what actually went on. She did 3 years of posting these different photos on Instagram, 500,000 followers.
500,000?
500. And instead, she launched on Vimeo. This is the video of her without the makeup, and it's a campaign called Let's Be Game Changers. And she realized after a week of doing this, of not posting, being so active on social media, she realized she listened more and she had more time and was less stressed out and much happier, because you're not trying to one-up everybody else with your photos.
Well, good for her. We'll take your followers.